Grit is passion and perseverance for long-term goals. It is correlated 0 with any measure of innate talent. Grit is working hard at something that you love, doing something that you love, and doing it at your greatest effort every single day. That is what grit is.
I started studying kids and adults in all kinds of super challenging settings. And in every study, my question was, who is successful here and why? My research team and I went to West Point Military Academy. We tried to predict which cadets would stay in military training and which would drop out. We went to the National Spelling Bee and tried to predict which children would advance farthest in competition. We studied rookie teachers working in really tough neighborhoods, asking which teachers are still going to be here in teaching by the end of the school year. And of those, who will be the most effective at improving learning outcomes for their students? We partnered with private companies asking which of these salespeople is going to keep their jobs and who's going to earn the most money. In all those very different contexts, one characteristic emerged as a significant predictor of success. And it wasn't social intelligence, it wasn't good looks, physical health, and it wasn't IQ. It was grit. Grit is passion and perseverance for very long-term goals. Grit is having stamina. Grit is sticking with your future, day in, day out, not just for the week, not just for the month, but for years, and working really hard to make that future a reality. Grit is living life like it's a marathon, not a sprint. To me, the most shocking thing about grit is how little we know, how little science knows about building it. Every day, parents and teachers ask me, how do I build grit in kids? What do I do to teach kids a solid work ethic? How do I keep them motivated for the long run? The honest answer is, I don't know. What I do know is that talent doesn't make you gritty. Our data show very clearly that there are many talented individuals who simply do not follow through on their commitments. In fact, in our data, grit is usually unrelated or even inversely related to measures of talent. So far, the best idea I've heard about building grit in kids is something called growth mindset. This is an idea developed at Stanford University by Carol Dweck, and it is the belief that the ability to learn is not fixed, that it can change with your effort. Dr. Dweck has shown that when kids read and learn about the brain and how it changes and grows in response to challenge, they're much more likely to persevere when they fail because they don't believe that failure is a permanent condition. So growth mindset is a great idea for building grit, but we need more. And that's where I'm going to end my remarks, because that's where we are. That's the work that stands before us. We need to take our best ideas, our strongest intuitions, and we need to test them. We need to measure whether we've been successful, and we have to be willing to fail, to be wrong, to start over again with lessons learned. In other words, we need to be gritty about getting our kids grittier. Thank you.
Dr. Duckworth, you say that based on the research that there are 4 things that make up grit. And I want to take them one by one and really unpack them. And let's start with the first one, which is interest. What does that mean?
So when you look at people who are great at what they do, and it actually doesn't have to be that they're a physicist. This is true of athletes. This is true of, musicians, chefs, anybody who becomes great at what they do. There's curiosity, right? Their mind comes to this subject and wants to stay there, right? And when you look at children and you ask yourself, whatever age you are, you could see, where is this mind going, right? I mean, there are people who say, oh, I'm not intellectual, oh, I'm not really smart. When you start talking about something that you really care about, you are a genius because that is where your mind lives. So that is the first psychological asset. And it happens, usually, well, we hope in childhood, meaning you do have to be exposed to things. I think great parenting, a lot of it is noticing what your young person is thinking about. When my daughter Lucy was growing up, I will tell you that this child was not obviously a hard worker. She was easily discouraged. She really hated doing homework or practicing her, viola. But when I would get the iPad after she, had, run off with it, all of the tabs were open to baking videos, right? Like unicorn cookies and like chocolate cupcakes. And on Monday, Lucy would be telling me what she was going to bake on Saturday. She would pull my cookbooks off the shelf and start reading them, well before you usually do that kind of thing. So I will say the first stage of grit is interest, and you don't always even know that you're interested in something until a passerby or a loved one says, hey, by the way, you spend a lot of time thinking about X, Y, or Z. So that is the first psychological asset of grit. I don't believe that you can grow passion without the seed of interest. And I genuinely believe that though we may not all be equal in IQ, though we may have different talents, that when we begin to notice where our mind lives, when we begin to notice what attracts our attention spontaneously, that is the beginning of discovering the interests that can make us something of a genius about what we do.
But what questions should you ask yourself if you're not sure what you're interested in?
I want to say something really provocative. I think maybe instead of asking yourself another question, you should just go and do something, right? Like my Pilates teacher would say, like, don't think it, just do it. Don't think it, just do it. Stop writing in a journal. Stop asking yourself questions. Like literally go out and do something. Interests are like food. You got to taste it to know whether you like it or not. And that to me is the number one mistake I see people making. They like think about it and then they want to talk to their friends about it. Okay, there's a limited amount of good that does. But one of the things about interest is they really do emerge from experience, and you can't predict. I remember teaching these 3 triplets, these, adorable boys, and they were all very fine students. And, like so many young adults, they were like thinking about what they were going to do with their career. But all it took was one summer internship to be sitting behind a desk and a terminal and to realize like, I am going to go crazy. Why? Because I don't like sitting down this much. Well, probably can rule out the job that you just interned for, right? And now that person became like a fitness instructor. So how would he know that? No amount of journaling, no amount of reflecting, and no amount of conversing with friends is going to substitute for 1 hour of actual experience. So in science, the science of interest, the science of motivation, we call this sampling.
Okay.
So before you specialize in being an author or a podcast host or a psychologist like me, you have to sample broadly. So the paradox of specialization is that it's preceded by a breadth of sampling. So before you become a jack of one trade, to some extent you have to try a lot of trades, right? And so with children, what you see, very wise and certainly very privileged parents, right? Because it sometimes costs money to do this, they're cycling their kids through a variety of pursuits so they can sample, so they can taste things and spit them out if they don't like them. My daughter Lucy, the one who I mentioned with great fondness, was not prodigiously gritty when she was growing up. We cycled her through ballet, through pottery. She did track one year. She played the viola. I mean, one thing after the other. We had in our family the hard thing rule. Families have their rules. We, in the Duckworth family, raised our kids by the hard thing rule. It had 3 parts, and it was all really about the philosophy of interest and sampling. So the first part was, well, it has to be something that requires your hard thing, because everyone has to do the hard thing, right? So you can choose a hard thing, but the hard thing has to have an element of deliberate practice. So it has to have goals and, effort and feedback, okay? So viola counted, right? But like that little studio down the street where you basically just ate goldfish crackers and like hung out, like that doesn't count because there are no goals, there's no effort, there's no feedback. Okay, that was rule part 1. The second part was you were not allowed to quit in the middle. So when Lucy came home from her very first track meet, she actually came up to the bleachers and she was like, Mom, I don't want to run track anymore. And I was like, okay, you don't have to run track anymore. You only have 8 more weeks to go. So we did not let our kids quit in the
I
middle
love
of a
that rule.
commitment. We're
I love
like,
that rule.
you are Duckworth. We finish what we begin. But the third part was all about sampling. The third part said that nobody gets to choose your hard thing but you. And we never chose any of the hard things for our two daughters. Jason and I said, life is a multiple choice. It's not quite film. She wanted to do horseback riding. And we were like, we are not that rich and we don't live near horses. So there was some reality to the childhoods that they lived, but we really tried to let them sample as many things as possible. And, I knew as a psychologist at the time, getting my PhD and so forth, I knew that was our only prayer for this girl to be gritty, is that we absolutely had to find something that interested her.
If you're an adult listening to this and you're recognizing that you've spent decades of your life grinding away at things that you're not interested in, is there advice that you have, Dr. Duckworth, on how you internally figure out and lean into what you're actually authentically interested in? Because I always heard the word grit and immediately assumed suffering and grinding it out.
Doing things that are hard and terrible.
Yes.
Yeah.
And instead, the first thing begins with things that you're actually interested in, because if you're interested in it, you're going to lean into it more.
When I teach a class at the University of Pennsylvania, it's a little Ivy League school in Philadelphia, and the first section of this class, which is called Grit Lab, the whole class is called Grit Lab. The first section of the course, it's on the flow state, it's on interests, it's on values. It's called Choose Easy. And I tell my students, you will never be great in life at something where it is the hardest thing of all the things in the life menu that you could pick. Choose the easiest one. Choose the one that you want to think about. Choose the one that you're good at. Like, choose easy. And then the second part of the course is work hard. Sometimes I call it work smart. So fine, choose easy is the entree. Yes, there is a second section where you have to work, but my goodness, you're never, this, Mel, like people make this mistake all the time. They don't take into account what their interests and their energy and their, be at a place where you are at your best. Start there.
I think if you were to dig into this as a research project, you would probably trace it back to the pressure that kids feel to do what their parents want them to do. Because conforming in the moment feels easier. And if that's all that you've ever done, then that becomes the default.
Well, there is, I'm sure, many people have heard, and I know you know a lot about this intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation distinction, right? And one of the things that, has emerged, it's a really, I think it's a very important research literature. It goes back at least 50 years. One of the stages in which our motivation evolves to be intrinsic is a stage where you are internalizing the motivations of others around you, right? So if you have parents who play a lot of tennis, you may start playing tennis, and at some point it becomes internal to you, and then you're 45 years old and you want to go play tennis, and that is actually a healthy thing, that many intrinsic motivations begin outside of us.
Yes.
But when they get stuck in between, it's called introjection. It's fancy little, whatever, it's just jargon. But when it gets stuck, it's like your parents want you to go to medical school, but it doesn't become fully internalized and you never really want to go to medical school. And it gets stuck at the should stage. It's like, I should go to medical school.
Yes.
I should take organic chemistry. I should go for a run. I should lose 5 pounds. I should eat a salad. That is not a good stage, because it's kind of got one foot in intrinsic, one foot in extrinsic, and we're driven forward in a way that is extremely exhausting and feels untrue to our authentic selves.
I think that's where most people are. So if you're somebody who, the second you said make the easier choice,
you viscerally were like, no.
Or you're like, how do you even do that?
I don't have that
because
muscle.
I'm constantly thinking about the choice that would please my parents, or that would please my partner,
my
or
partner's
that
gonna
would
say
look good for my friends. Like, is there anything that you would say about what does that even mean? Because I think that's a completely different way to go about life.
I mean, if I can only share from my personal experience, because I found it a struggle of my own. And I don't know whether it's because, I was raised by a wonderful mother, but a Chinese mother who herself was born and raised in China. And she was raised to submit all of her own desires and dreams to her husband's. Her mother laid her hands on her shoulders one day and said, "You are ready to be a wife." And when I graduated from Harvard, the day of my graduation, my mother laid her hands on my shoulders and she said, "I'm so proud of you. You are ready to be a wife." So what did I, then progress to do? Well, by the way, I have a growth mindset and so does my mom. And that was now 33 years ago. And we have both grown a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I have developed into a woman who believes that if I only do things for other people, I will never do things well enough for those people.
Let's talk about the second part of grit, which is practice.
Now you're interested, of course, but you have a second motivation on top of that, and that is the desire to improve. So it's usually not until you are in adolescence, sometimes late adolescence, and sometimes early adulthood, that you want to get better at something in a skill development kind of way. And so that's when you need usually a coach. That's when you need to do, you've heard of 10,000 hours of deliberate practice?
I have, but for the person who's listening who doesn't know the 10,000 hour rule, just explain it. Back of the hand here.
I cannot tell you how excited I am to tell you about deliberate practice, the 10,000 hour rule, because I think so many people have heard it. Very few people have heard it correctly. So what is the 10,000 hour rule? Anders Ericsson was a truly great cognitive scientist. He studied Sudoku players who were at the top of their game. He studied chess masters, grand master chess players. He studied prima ballerinas. He studied World Cup soccer players. He was the world expert on world experts. And in one of his early studies, he found that the very best violinists at a music academy in Germany had about 10,000 hours of a certain high quality practice that he later called deliberate practice. The next group at this music academy, they weren't as good. They had something like 7,500 hours. And then maybe the next group was like 5,000 hours. There were differences in the quantity of practice. And it became this very popular term that you got to do 10,000 hours of practice if you want to become great at what you do. But Anders, who passed away 5 years ago, to his dying day, wanted the world to know that it's not just the quantity of practice, it was the quality of what those musicians were doing. Not just quantity, but quality. So usually something that you're weak at, you completely concentrate on trying to get better at it. You have a mental picture of what you want to do, but you can't do it yet. And then you try really hard, mentally or physically, depending on what you are trying to do. And then you get feedback on what you did well, maybe what you didn't do quite as well as you need to.
Part.
That's the part that stings. That's the hard part, right?
Yes.
The really hard, because your ego is, screaming. And then you do it over and over again. That's the high quality practice. When you look at the thousands of hours of practice that a lot of us do, including myself, when I met Anders, I was like, wait, I don't know if I believe this, because I've been running if I tabulate all the hours I had jogged in my life, I was like, I should be Usain Bolt. And he was like, well, do you have a goal? And I was like, never. He was like, do you practice with complete effort and concentration? I'm like, when I'm running? No, I'm listening to podcasts. And then he said, do you get immediate feedback on things that you could improve before you go out for your next run? And I was like, are you kidding? Who would give me that? So I was doing low quality practice. So the 10,000 hour rule is this. If you want to become great at what you do, you have to do thousands of hours, maybe not the exact number, 10,000, but yes, thousands of hours of the highest quality practice that you can do. And what Anders and I found together is that when you are really passionate and persevering about a long-term goal, you are the sort of person who puts in more of those high quality hours.
And in listening to you, it also sounds like there are three things that determine what makes up high quality hours. And you use the words deliberate practice, that you're doing the thing with a goal in mind, that you are giving it your all, and that you get immediate feedback afterwards.
Exactly right. I mean, it's so simple, isn't it? Mel, it's free.
It sounds painful, honestly.
Okay, it's painful. It's painful, but there's no patent. You don't have to pay anybody, right? I mean,
I'm joking, but
it's psychologically costly, but it's financially available to all of us.
Well, I love how honest you are when you basically said, I've basically jogged for 10,000 hours, so why am I not winning the Olympics?
Yeah.
Let's hit the final one. hope. So you say that grit depends on a different kind of hope. It rests on the expectation that our own efforts can improve our future. I have a feeling tomorrow will be better is different from I resolve to make tomorrow better.
Hope is something that doesn't have a chapter because I think you need hope whether you're 4 or 104. And, we spoke about growth mindset, Mel. And when you ask me, what is hope really? Hope is the belief that the future can be better than the past. And it is the belief that you can, in some way, make that come to pass. When you think about your life, when you think about your happiness, when you think about your health, when you think about your children and what you can do in their lives, a hopeful person says, I think the future can be better than the past. And I think there's something, even a small thing, that I can do to make it so. And it is the nature of human nature to make mistakes, royally screw up, have a lot of regrets, and be smarter and stronger for the experience. So when I see people who are gritty, at any age, they have this, durable sense that because they are learners, because it is in their nature to develop and not to stagnate, that is what drives their optimism and their hope for getting something done the next day as opposed to staying in bed. To me, the most important thing is to find something that can be that little victory that gives you hard evidence that you can do something if you try. And that's what I try to remember, but don't always enact with myself and, of course, with my children.
I'm so glad that we're talking about this because I've come to believe that the single biggest thing standing in people's way is not ability, it's a lack of hope. It's this sense of discouragement that no matter what I do, it's not going to work.
It's not going to get better.
Or it's not going to get better.
Yeah.
And so for the person that feels that sense of discouragement, I'm too old, it's too far gone, there's no fixing this, I'm hopeless, blah, 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 blah. What would you say to them, Dr. Duckworth?
So you can be an Olympic coach if you do this, right? What do Olympic coaches do? You know what they do? They take something that an athlete needs to do, something that looks pretty darn impossible, right? Maybe not only to those of us who watch the Olympics every 4 years, but even to the athlete themselves. They break it down into tiny parts, 100 parts. And the next thing is so small that of course you can do it. I'll just use a personal example. I'm writing a book. It's the hardest thing I've ever done. Many tears, months and years of struggle, insomnia. I mean, I've been through all of it with this book. When I'm really discouraged, I take my pen and I get it out and I put a to-do list together that is so ridiculously simple, like open Google Doc. And then I open the Google Doc and I check it off. Small win, like I could say to myself, like, spend 5 minutes looking at this, paper that I printed out that I don't understand, write it down, check it off, small win. And so you can be your own Olympic coach if you break down these things that are feeling discouraging to you. When you feel that feeling of discouragement, you should just think to yourself, too big, right? Too big. That's what it is. Not impossible. Too big, right? You need to eat in, spoonfuls. You can't like swallow too much. So be your own Olympic coach.
I love that. It's too big.
Yeah.
It's too
Choose
big.
easy. Too big. Do
Too
a smaller
big.
thing. Can't do like 10 minutes of physical therapy. Do one.
Well, speaking directly to the person who is with us right now, if they take just one action out of everything that you have poured into us today, what do you think the most important thing to do?
I don't think you should try to do everything. I think you should try to do one thing, right? Because again, Mel, if there's one lesson from grit that really surprised me, it's the consistency. It's the, try to have an 8 out of 10, like Michael Phelps. Try to have a 7 out of 10. Frankly, try to have a 10 out of 10. But if you are 1 out of 10 and then another 1 out of 10, but it's never 0 out of 10, then you will glimpse excellence in your own life. I truly believe that, Mel, no matter how talented you were born, no matter what it is that you want to do, if you want to glimpse your own potential, consistency is the way.
Dr. Duckworth, what are your parting words?
My daughter, Amanda, was getting tucked into bed by her mother many years ago. I think she was in kindergarten, and it was one of those days. And I did not want to swear, and I tucked her into bed after this very long day when she had been really a handful. And I said, Amanda, you have been trying. And she looked at me with these big eyes and she said, Mommy, we're all trying. And I nearly cried. And I thought to myself, she's right. I mean, we are all good inside. We are all ambitious. Every single one of us is trying. And I think if there's anything I can do to help us try, if there's anything I can do to help us try more wisely, then it will be a life well lived.